At my cousin's graduation party, right in the middle of all the clinking glasses and polite applause, her mother leaned over and said, loud enough for folks nearby to hear, "Your daughter dropped out. Maybe she'll find her calling waiting tables." A few people chuckled. Not uproarious laughter, just enough to sting. I glanced over and saw my daughter, Zuri, lower her eyes to her lap. She didn't say a thing. Then, almost like on cue, a black car rolled up out front. Not a flashy one, just clean, polished, understated. A man in a sharp suit stepped out, walked in like he had a purpose, and said, "We're here for Dr. Jordan, Harvard's newest hire." Is she ready? Earlier that day, just as the celebration was hitting its stride, my sister Ashley had raised her glass high and called out to Lisa, the pride of our family. Then she added, with just the right amount of edge, unlike some girls who drop out and chase dreams that don't pay bills, Lisa actually finished what she started. The laugh that followed wasn't loud, but it carried. It wasn't for fun, it had a target. And that target was sitting right beside me, dressed in a pale blue dress she'd ironed 3 times to make sure it looked just right. Zuri kept her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. But I saw her blink twice, slow and deliberate, like she was fighting back tears with every ounce of control she had left. I glanced around the backyard. It looked like a Pinterest board come to life, gold balloons floating under string lights, banners with "You did it, Lisa" in bold script, a spread of catered food, tiny champagne bottles with monogram tags. And there was Ashley, my sister, the golden child. Nurse practitioner, married to a finance guy, carrying a purse that probably cost more than my car. Beaming like she'd just won something. Then there was me. A single mom, a high school English teacher, showing up quietly in a blouse that still smelled faintly of chalkboard dust. I'd parked a few blocks away so no one would hear the high-pitched squeal my brakes make. I was the mother of the MIT dropout. That's how they saw it. But let me be clear, I was never ashamed of Zuri. Not once. They didn't know what she'd been through. They didn't see her pushing herself for days with barely any sleep, pouring everything she had into machine learning models that even her professors struggled to keep up with. They didn't hear her voice shake when she called me one night and said she had to leave MIT not because she couldn't do the work, but because something about it felt off. Because she wanted to build something. Not just collect degrees. Not that any of that mattered to them. All they saw was the punchline. All they cared about was how her story looked from the outside, like it had already ended in failure. And then, just as if the universe had had enough of their smug little party, that car arrived. Sleek, quiet, purposeful. At first, no one paid it much attention. Then the back door opened, and a man in a dark gray suit stepped out. He didn't hesitate. He didn't scan the crowd. He just walked through the gate, under the balloon arch, right past the pergola and straight up to our table. In a heartbeat, the whole backyard went quiet, like somebody hit pause. He looked at my daughter and asked, "Dr. Zuri Thompson?" She raised her head, calm as ever, and nodded. "Yes," she replied, steady and clear. The man nodded with the kind of respect that doesn't need to be announced. "We're here from the Harvard AI Research Initiative. Congratulations. You're officially the youngest hire in the program's history. If you're ready, we'll escort you to the press conference." I forgot to breathe. I saw Ashley's jaw go slack, her champagne glass tipping slightly in her hand. Someone gasped. Lisa froze with a fork halfway to her mouth. Zuri smoothed a curl behind her ear and glanced at me. She didn't grin, but I saw it in her eyes, like she was saying, "I told you I'd get there." Then, without drama, without a single word of gloating, she nodded at the man and walked beside him toward the car. No grand speech. No revenge. Just grace. Strength. They had laughed at her, looked down on her, assumed they knew how her story would end. But they didn't even realize they were still stuck in the prologue. The invitation had come in the mail weeks before, in one of those heavy envelopes with rose gold lettering, You are cordially invited to celebrate Kayla Briggs' graduation from the University of Georgia. It was cold. Pretty, but cold, more about presentation than people. I stared at it for a whole day before I even told Zuri. I knew what the event would be, a perfectly staged showcase. A way for Ashley to parade her wins. Her husband, her job, her well-behaved daughter, and their wraparound porch life. That's always been Ashley. Even as kids, she made honor roll while I was folding laundry and cleaning up the kitchen after Mom's night shifts. She'd smirk at me when I forgot to do Zuri's hair before Sunday school. Still, I RSVP'd yes. Not for Ashley. Not for appearances. I did it for Zuri. She didn't know anyone anything, but hiding would have just fed their narrative that something had gone wrong. That she'd failed. On the day of the party, we got ready in silence. Zuri wore the dress I'd bought her during one of our rare shopping trips, light blue, simple, elegant. She brushed out her curls and parted them just off-center. No makeup. She looked young, but solid. Stronger than she knew. I put on a navy blouse I hadn't worn since I'd interviewed for department head. Didn't get the job, but I'd kept the shirt. It reminded me that I was still trying. In the car, I caught glimpses of her in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window, eyes locked on something far off. I wanted to say something meaningful, something that would stick with her. But everything I thought of felt too little, too late. So all I said was, "You okay?" She nodded once. "I'm fine." It wasn't true, but I didn't push. Ashley's house looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. White brick, flawless flower beds, a banner stretched across the porch. Cars lined the street. I parked around the corner so no one would hear my old car cry out when I braked. Zuri stepped out without missing a beat, back straight, face unreadable. The backyard was everything I expected. Twinkling lights strung above white tablecloths, a chocolate fountain, champagne flutes already half full. Lisa stood at the center of it all, glowing in a sea of sundresses and button-ups, like the world had never told her no. Ashley saw us before we even made it past the hedges. She waved, but there was something stiff about it, like she was holding back something sharper. I walked toward her with Zuri at my side, each step tight in my chest, bracing for whatever passive-aggressive performance she had planned. "Well, look who made it," Ashley said, her smile thin. "Honestly, I wasn't sure you'd show." I kept my voice steady. "We said we'd be here." Her eyes flicked over to Zuri, that polished gaze she'd mastered over the years. "And you look well-rested," she said. "That's good. Sometimes all it takes is a little rest when you're trying to figure things out." Zuri offered a polite smile, one of those small ones you give when you're playing nice, but not really in the mood to pretend. I introduced her to a few cousins she hadn't seen since high school cookouts and holiday dinners. The small talk was polite on the surface, but you could feel the undercurrent pulling at every word. Folks said things like, "So, what's next?" or "Still taking time off," as if her life had stalled out and nobody told her. There was soft jazz humming through the speakers, something smooth and forgettable, but it couldn't muffle the judgment tucked between their compliments. People looked at Lisa like she was a walking trophy. When they glanced at Zuri, their expressions shifted, gentle concern, polite discomfort, like she was the cautionary footnote they didn't want their kids to become. Every so often I'd scan the yard, searching for someone familiar, someone safe, but it was all half-remembered faces and people who thought they still knew who we were. Zuri excused herself to grab a soda and stood near the buffet, arms loose at her sides as the speeches started. I lingered at the edge of the group, arms crossed, pretending to care while Ashley's husband toasted Lisa like she'd just solved world hunger. And then Ashley took the spotlight. Champagne in hand, glowing with satisfaction. She glanced toward our side of the yard, not directly at Zuri, but just close enough. "Some kids just know from the start," she said, lifting her glass. "They don't waver. They don't lose focus. They finish what they begin." That wasn't a compliment. It was a landmine wrapped in silk. Zuri didn't blink. She just sipped from her cup and looked straight ahead. But I saw it, the flicker. Not pain. Not even anger. Just that quiet recognition of being dismissed again. It landed somewhere deep. Right then, I understood we weren't guests at a party. We were targets in a well-decorated war zone. Ashley didn't throw punches. She wielded words like scalpels, sharp, cold, and always aimed to cut clean. She didn't need to raise her voice to make someone feel small. Never had. The party rolled on like nothing happened. People went back to piling shrimp skewers onto plates and nibbling lemon cake. The DJ had shifted to some soft R&B under a white canopy. I stayed close to Zuri, close enough that she wouldn't feel adrift, but not so close that she'd feel smothered. She sat at a quiet table beneath a magnolia tree, her hands resting in her lap again, her gaze grazing the grass. Detached. Removed. Like the party was happening a mile away. Every so often someone would approach, mostly out of politeness, asking things they didn't want real answers to. So, Zuri, what are you up to these days? Oh, just taking some time. That's great. Lisa already locked down her internship, but hey, everyone's journey looks different, right? Zuri nodded, smiled faintly. She didn't offer explanations or justifications. Just simple, quiet acknowledgments. The kind you give when you've already survived the storm and don't need to prove you're still standing. Then Ashley decided she hadn't had enough of the spotlight. She walked to the center of the yard with a fresh glass of champagne and cleared her throat. It went quiet fast, people knew the drill. She lived for moments like this. I just want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate Lisa, she said, glowing like a woman who'd personally delivered her child into success. You all know how much she's put in, graduating with full honors, scholarships, internships, and now an offer from one of the top financial firms in New York. We are just beyond proud. Applause broke out. Cameras clicked. Lisa smiled like she'd trained for this moment. Picture perfect, sunlit, and centered beneath the banner like a Hallmark card. But Ashley wasn't finished. She paused, then added, of course, not every path is like this. Some people take a few wrong turns. Some take longer routes. Some drop out to explore, I guess. Maybe they'll find themselves. Maybe they'll end up waitressing. Who knows? She didn't say Zuri's name. She didn't have to. The shift in the crowd was instant. Heads turned. Eyes landed on us. A ripple of laughter moved through the group. Not a full roar, but loud enough. Enough to make it burn. I turned to look at my daughter. She hadn't moved. Hands folded, posture steady. But I noticed the subtle shift in her jaw, the small drop of her chin, and the two blinks, slow and deliberate. She didn't cry. She didn't walk away. She sat there and took it all in, like she'd been preparing for this her whole life. Something inside me cracked wide open. I stood up halfway, frozen between storming across the yard and wrapping her in my arms. I didn't know which would help more. My gut screamed at me to speak up, to call Ashley out in front of everyone the way she had just humiliated my child. But then Zuri reached under the table and lightly touched my forearm. Just once. Soft. Firm. Enough to stop me cold. That was her saying, don't. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she didn't want to hand them anything more to gossip about. So I sat back down. Around us, the conversations picked up again, as if nothing had happened. Laughter. Small talk. More photos. The jab had already been tucked away beneath the ribbon and glitter of the event. But I couldn't let it go. Not like that. I kept my eyes on Zuri. Her face stayed calm, almost blank, but I knew better. I knew what it cost to be judged by people who hadn't lived an ounce of your truth. People who only saw headlines and thought they knew the whole story. What they didn't know, what they'd never guess, is that Zuri didn't drop out because she failed. She left MIT with offers already on the table from labs that respected her work. She was consulting with companies on ethical AI, knee-deep in real data, co-authoring papers that professors were citing. She hadn't told any of them. Not because she was ashamed. Because she didn't need their permission to exist on her terms. But still, I'm a mother. No matter how tough she is, no matter how sure, I'm still the one who has to watch while people who should love her reduce her to a punchline. Ashley strolled past us not long after, leaned in close enough for only me to hear, and whispered with that smug little smirk, "No hard feelings, sis. We're just having a bit of fun." I didn't blink, didn't nod, didn't give her a single thing she could twist into satisfaction. Because I had something she didn't. The truth was on its way. And it was about to land right in the middle of her picture-perfect celebration. What stayed with me wasn't what Zuri said or didn't say, it was what she didn't do. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry or storm off or raise her voice to defend herself. After all the snide comments, the pointed toasts, the carefully crafted insults dressed as life lessons, she just sat there. Still, quiet, composed. Eyes trained somewhere far beyond that backyard. But something had shifted. I couldn't explain it to anyone else, but I felt it in the air, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees, like the pressure had changed. She'd absorbed the blow, and in that moment, made a decision. She wasn't going to fight back with words. She wasn't going to play their game. She was going to answer with presence. I leaned toward her, keeping my voice low, gentle. "You okay?" She didn't rush to reply. Just sat with it for a moment, then gave the smallest nod and said, "I'm not mad. I'm just done pretending." Those words knocked the wind out of me. I'd spent years telling her to take the high road, to ignore the noise, to protect her peace by staying quiet. I thought I was helping her stay strong, but what I hadn't realized was that silence costs something too. Every time she let them misjudge her, every time she smiled through it, she was carrying that weight alone. And now she'd hit her limit. Zuri rose slowly from her chair, brushed the wrinkles from her dress, squared her shoulders. "I'm going to get some air," she said. She didn't head toward the house or the buffet or the photo area. She walked toward the side gate, the one that led to the driveway out front. I wanted to follow. Everything in me wanted to go with her. But I knew this moment belonged to her, not to me. This wasn't about me shielding her anymore. It was about her stepping forward, fully, without anyone's permission. A few minutes passed. Long enough for the party to settle back into its rhythm. People danced a little. Lisa kept posing for pictures. Ashley stood near the fire pit, surrounded by women who looked like they'd stepped out of a lifestyle blog, trading stories about hospital drama and Lisa's salary. Then it happened. I heard a car pull up, low and quiet, like it didn't need to draw attention. No bass, no horn, just presence. Heads turned. Conversations faded. A sleek black sedan with tinted windows parked at the curb. It didn't need to scream status. It was status. Simple. Sharp. Purposeful. The back door opened, and a man in a crisp charcoal suit stepped out. He wasn't in a hurry. He didn't look around to find someone. He already knew exactly where he was going. His movements were steady, calm, intentional, like someone on assignment. He walked through the gate without hesitation. The party fell silent again. All those whispers and clinks of glass just stopped. I stood up, my heart racing, but not out of fear. Out of recognition. I didn't know the man, but I knew why he was there. He walked straight to Zuri, who had returned and was standing just inside the gate. She wasn't hiding in the corner or looking for me. She was just waiting. Ready. He looked her in the eye. "Dr. Charles." The words hit the crowd like thunder. Not a nickname. Not a guess. A title. A fact. "Yes," she said. "We're here on behalf of Harvard's AI Research Initiative. You're scheduled to speak at the announcement briefing in 2 hours. If you're ready, we'll escort you now." The silence that followed felt holy. You could hear the soft burble of the garden fountain. The wind rustling the paper banners. Someone's fork hit a plate, and no one even looked to see whose it was. Zuri turned her head slightly and met my eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. Her look said everything. "I told you I was building something. I'm done hiding." Then she turned back to the man, nodded once, and said, "I'm ready." No speech. No grand statement. She didn't even glance at the people who'd spent the day doubting her. She walked forward, measured, calm, certain. And I stood still, my hands on the table, chest tight with pride that felt too big to hold, watching my daughter step into her place in the world, not begging for room, not waiting for validation. Claiming it. She didn't rush. She walked like someone who already belonged. The man opened the door for her, and she paused for half a heartbeat, not to look at me, not to look at Ashley, but to take in the scene she was leaving behind. And then she stepped inside. The car pulled away, no fuss, just the soft crunch of gravel and the hum of purpose. That was it. She was gone. But what she left in her wake? Silence. Thick and stunned. No music. No clinking glasses. No one knew what to say. I stood rooted to the ground, fingers gripping the edge of the table, while everyone stared after that car like they expected it to turn around. It didn't. Ashley still had her champagne lifted midair. Her mouth slightly open like the punchline had been stolen. Lisa stood frozen beside her, unsure whether she was still the star of the show. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then, slowly, the murmurs started again. But they weren't the same. These weren't gossipy chuckles or curious whispers. They were shame-filled. Embarrassed. People who had smirked at Ashley's waitress jab earlier suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. One woman, some cousin I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, brushed past and muttered, "That was impressive," before ducking behind the drinks table. Ashley was the first to recover, naturally. She let out a short, awkward laugh, just a little too high. "Well," she said, trying to play it off, "I guess she forgot to mention she's giving TED Talks now, or whatever that was." Then she turned to me, eyes narrowed, trying to claw back control. "You knew about that, didn't you? Why wouldn't you say something?" I looked her straight in the eye. Calm. Even. "Because she didn't need to prove anything to you. And I didn't raise my voice. Because I didn't need to. I'm her mother," I said, calm but clear. "Not her PR team." Ashley's expression tightened, just for a second. That cool, polished look she always wore cracked a little. Her mouth opened like she was about to fire back, but no words came out. Instead, she turned away, pretending to fuss with the cooler straps, like she needed a reason to not meet my eyes. But that moment, it had already slipped past her. I eased back into my chair and took a slow sip of water. Across the yard, the chatter started up again, but something in the air had changed. The tone was different now. Gone was the smugness, the snide compliments, the veiled digs. What stayed behind was that name, Dr. Charles, spoken clearly by a serious man in a suit who didn't smile or soften the delivery. He said it straight, like a simple fact. And that's exactly what it was. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. A message from Zuri lit up the screen. "Heading to the campus center now. Just wanted to thank you for being there today. I didn't realize how much I needed you until I saw your face when he said my name." I stared at that message for a while, not because it shocked me, but because the pride I felt was so big it didn't fit into words. I hadn't raised her to chase applause. I didn't teach her to squeeze into anyone else's version of who she should be. I raised her to think for herself, to move through life with purpose, to stay strong in spaces where folks didn't think her voice belonged. And today, she stood in the very place where people once doubted her and made sure they remembered who she truly was. I watched Lisa rejoin her group of friends. She smiled for the photos, but her body looked tense, like she couldn't fully shake whatever had just shifted. The party carried on, but something beneath the surface had changed. It wasn't the only story in the room anymore, and the difference was impossible to miss. Zuri didn't wear a graduation cap that day. No one handed her a diploma in front of a cheering crowd. She didn't walk across a stage to applause. But what she got, that was better. She earned something real, something lasting, recognition that came from the right people, the ones who understood what it meant, and in front of the ones who didn't think she was worthy of it. That's where the power came from. Not from the surprise. Not from the car. Not even the title. The power came from the truth finally stepping into the light. And when it arrived, it didn't need to shout. It just stood there, said her name, and everything shifted. Even after the car drove off, the party didn't officially end. People kept milling around, trying to pick the vibe back up. They hung near the food, laughed louder than usual, clapped along to the music like they weren't forcing it. But the air had changed. The performance was done. Whatever role folks had been playing, whether it was pride, pity, or indifference, it couldn't cover what they had just seen. Zuri was gone, but the truth of who she was? That stayed right there with us. I stayed seated, plate still untouched, just watching the room. No one spoke to me right away. Most of them didn't know what to say. They'd spent the last hour acting like my daughter wasn't much to look at. Now, they couldn't change their story fast enough. Eventually, a few brave souls came over. A cousin I hadn't heard from in years rested a hand on my shoulder and said, "Your girl's something special." Another man, related to Ashley somehow, gave me a short nod and added, "You should be proud." I gave a small smile and thanked them, but I didn't act like their words meant more than what we already knew to be true. Ashley kept her distance for the rest of the evening. She stuck close to Lisa, who was still smiling for the cameras, but her smile had lost some of its ease. She looked like someone who knew, deep down, she wasn't the brightest star in the room anymore. That wasn't Lisa's fault. She worked hard. She deserved her moment. But what Ashley never figured out is that someone else's success doesn't get any shinier by casting shadows on people nearby. Zuri wasn't trying to outshine anyone. She wasn't chasing claps or compliments. She had already built something bigger than all of that. She built strength. That night, when we got home, I noticed her bedroom door slightly open, her desk light still glowing. She wasn't in the room, but her laptop was open, and her notebook was lying beside it. A page of notes, half filled with sketches and formulas, had a pen resting on it, like she'd only stepped away for a moment. And that's when I knew this wasn't the end. This was just another chapter of something still becoming. Later, she called me from the university center. Her voice sounded light, grounded, even a little amused. They asked if I wanted to help write the press release, she said. I told them, nah. I'd rather let the work speak first. I laughed. I'm proud of you. There was a quiet pause. Then she said, I know. Not cocky. Just sure of herself. She said it like someone who had finally come to believe it deep down. In the days that followed, word started to spread. A few people from the party reached out, acting like they'd always seen her potential. One even asked if Zuri could talk to their niece about getting into coding. I passed the message along without any comment. Zuri answered politely. She didn't have anything left to prove. Nothing to defend. That's the difference between making a point and proving one. I found myself thinking about Ashley. I doubt she ever admitted to herself what she did that day. Maybe she told herself it was just a joke. Maybe she really believed it wasn't personal. But I don't need an apology from her. Because the moment that car rolled up and that man said Zuri's name out loud, she got something Ashley could never take away again. Not acceptance. Not applause. Respect. Earned, honest, undeniable respect. And I learned something too. As a mom, your instinct is to shield your kid from pain. But there comes a point where protection turns into permission to rise, to speak up, to walk into a room exactly as they are, without apology. That day, I didn't jump in to defend her. I didn't try to soften the blow or edit the story. I just stood still. And I let her own the moment. And she did. So let them whisper. Let them crack jokes or make their assumptions before the full story plays out. Because when the truth finally shows up, it doesn't ask for applause. It just walks in, says your name, and waits for you to stand. And my daughter stood that day, and she taught me something I'll carry with me forever. Not all victories come with fireworks. Not every win is loud. Some of the most powerful moments are quiet ones. A girl getting to her feet after being dismissed. A car arriving at the exact right time. A name spoken with the dignity it's always deserved. If this story makes you think of someone who's been doubted or talked down to, share it with them. Remind them their story's still unfolding. Remind them their moment is coming.